like he was selling me a good chunk of his action even at 5100 or 2550, and it was just basically money printing. Like my idea was sort of when I'm asleep, I would like to have like a copy of myself playing.
This time I'm gonna have a very epic podcast for you. I think it was one of my longest podcasts so far, more than 2 hours, and yeah, very excited that Raul Gonzalez joined me. He is a true high stakes heads up legend. We talk a lot about his memorable matches against Isildur, Tom Dwan, very sweet. We talk about staking. He's sharing tips on how he cope with bad sessions, around mindset, his routines, and his way of studying. It was a very valuable session, a very valuable podcast. So I'm already talking in terms of heads up matches here. So we didn't have a session, we had a podcast, and it was truly exciting, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you have some other questions, don't hesitate to drop it in the comments. And yeah, if you do enjoy it, I really appreciate you guys supporting it, liking it, subscribing, not missing out on any more content. And yeah, I don't want to tease you guys for too long. Enjoy the session now. And again, if you have a question, feel free to ask. And now let's jump right into it. All right, here we go. A podcast I'm very excited about with Raul Gonzalez. And I'm very grateful he's taking the time today to join me here. Welcome, buddy.
Thanks for
my German fellow and high stakes legend. You mostly played mixed games, right? Heads up. Or was it more mixed game or no limit hold'em?
For the last couple of years, I've not played any no limit hold'em at all. But from like the start of my career, like 2009 or so till 2014, I've exclusively played no limit heads up pretty much.
Okay.
So yeah, and since then I've not played any no limit hold'em at all, basically.
I see. And you have been lately very active in forums, especially in a German forum. What brought you to enlighten, as I just said, us plebs more about the heads up scene, and just answering a lot? You're very, very active, even writing very elaborated answers, not just quick answers, and you're really taking your time to answer everyone's question. Is it just something you feel like you would like to give something back to educate people more about poker? Is it what was the main driving force for you to be so active in the forum?
Basically, when I started playing poker, or at least when I started taking it more seriously, like many successful poker players on 2+2 had the habit of having a well from time to time, which is basically an AMA. And I always found these threads super interesting because everyone could ask them any kind of question pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously in some cases they wouldn't answer, but like 99% of the questions were answered. And I always found it super interesting to read these threads, especially the one from Gelfond. And yeah, I mean, I finished my poker career at the end of last year and basically had a lot of time. And I think the good thing about these AMAs is that you can just, like if you don't have any time one day, you don't answer anything. But if you're available a lot the next day, you can just answer as much as you want. So I wanted to give something back to say it that way. And I also realized during the AMA that it's kind of interesting for me to like reflect upon some things, and it was kind of a cool experience for me as well, I would say.
So you would say it's a mix of answering people's questions and also blogging. So you have the opportunity to look back and see, okay, this went well, this didn't go so well, something I regret.
Yeah, I think it's like it brings some benefits of like having your own diary, sort of.
Yeah. I see. What always intrigues me the most is, what did you do before you started playing poker?
Not that much, basically. I mean, I went to school. I pretty much started playing poker towards the end of my like before my abitur. My
Matura, I think it
I-
is.
yeah, right.
Hmm.
Uh, um, I mean, I was kind of doing a lot of sports at that time still, and I
What kind of
played
sports?
table tennis and
Hmm.
track and field.
Hmm. What is track and field?
Track and field is like Leichtathletik in German. It's
Ah, okay.
like running
Yeah.
and yeah. Um, and I was playing Warcraft 3, like at I would say, semi-professional
Mm-hmm.
level. Yeah, so I was not any like in that game. It's an RTS, real-time strategy game.
Yeah.
I was not any close to like making money off it or
Yeah.
any like significant money, but I was playing quite a lot. Yeah.
But did you have the ambition to go pro in Warcraft 3 at some point?
No. I mean, I was just not good enough or not talented enough. And like, for example, one of my friends was playing at SK Gaming. Like, he was one of the best German players.
Mm-hmm.
And he was spending far less time than I did, and he was much better. So that kind of showed me the perspective that it will be quite hard for me to become professional.
Yeah. I guess
Uh,
I know who you mean. Can you tell me the
it's
name?
not. It's he was SK Storm was his name.
But there were also a couple of German players. There was
I
one
mean,
guy that
like
also used to play somewhat more on a
Taker,
professional. Yeah, Taker, and there
Taker,
was
for
another guy.
example. Yeah, I think I know who you mean, but I don't remember the name actually. I think like quite a lot of people
What about
from.
Hasufly? Didn't he also play something professional before?
No. Like I had that misconception as well. Like there's Hasufly and there's Hasu Ops. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
so Hasu Fly was like he was better than me at Warcraft, but he was still not like really near to a professional level.
Hmm.
And he became a super good limit hold'em player, and like he played nosebleeds. He was one of the first nosebleeds
Mm-hmm.
players from. And then there's Hasu Ops, who was one of the best Warcraft, one of the best StarCraft players from Germany, but he
Yeah.
never played, to my
Ah,
knowledge. Like,
okay.
he's actually my favorite streamer on Twitch, and I watch him pretty much every day or every second day. So yeah, but and like with Hasu Fly, I became kind of close friends when he moved to Cologne.
Yeah.
So yeah, before that was an identical person for me as well, Hasu Ops and Hasu Fly, but yeah, not the case.
Have you ever worked in a regular job, or did you just from school right into poker?
From school right into poker, I mean, I started studying right after poker. And at the beginning, like at least my mindset was I'm full-time studying and I'm playing poker as much as like my spare time allows me to. But I think kind of quickly it was rather the other way around. So I was
Mm-hmm.
playing poker full-time and I was part-time studying, I would say. And at some point, basically when I finished my bachelor degree in economics,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of stopped studying altogether. I mean, I started doing my master studies in economics, but I basically never really put any effort into it. And yeah, so I never worked in a regular job at all.
What was poker giving you that you decided to go more deeper into poker rather than pursuing a normal career?
Yeah. So I think at first it just replaced Warcraft 3 for me because I don't know. I got a little bit tired out of that game, and also my friends stopped playing because they were studying for real. Um, and I kind of looked for a replacement for Warcraft 3. So poker was kind of good for that. Although, like initially, I didn't like poker that much because, I mean, it's hard to say, but like in Warcraft 3, the competitive level is way more direct, and like in poker, I mean, obviously you have the variance, and it's not as easy to see your progress. I would say, or
Mm-hmm.
not as easy to progress by just practicing. And it kind of appealed to me that you could like rise through the stakes from playing 1 cent, 2 cents to theoretically 500, 1K. And it was kind of cool experience to rise up through the stakes. So I think that appealed the most to me. Yeah, I think at the beginning it didn't really I didn't really understood poker well enough to appreciate how beautiful the game is. It was more like me against the world, leveling through these stakes.
Was it that you were playing heads up right from the start, or did you play any other formats?
No, I started off. I started off playing the short stack strategy that was promoted back then on Poker Strategy.
Everyone was playing it. I remember.
Yeah, and I mean it was super boring. So that didn't contribute to my like enjoyment of poker that much, because you were just having like a very simple chart and you were holding like 90% of your hands, and then I don't know how it was exactly, but I think you open raised, like you had 20 big blind stacks and open raised 4x or something, and against an open raise you were just push or fold. So
and c-bet and then give up only if you pick up something on the turn, just like super.
Like
that wasn't even the advanced strategy. Like I remember it's like advanced R tickets. Okay, now second barreling turn. If you pick up equity, you second barrel. That was the advanced part of the strategy.
Like I think it's kind of hard when you play like that to enjoy poker, because you were basically, if you played by the chart, you were not allowed to have your own thoughts about the game. You were just applying the strategy. Like the bot could easily do it just as good as any human. And then at some point, maybe like 1.5 years or 1 year later, there was a heads up video series on poker strategy by some guy. And that I found that way more interesting, or look way more enjoyable to me than playing this short stack. I think at some point I also started playing like full stack strategy on my own for ring game, but it's
full stack, you mean big stack strategy, right? 100
right. But yeah, I enjoyed heads up much more right from the beginning, basically.
Yeah. Was it something where you would say you consider yourself as someone who enjoys the complexity of the game, solving such complex game trees that sometimes occur in heads up where ranges are really wide? Or is it you enjoyed it more because of the competitiveness, that it's like 1v1, man against man, or maybe sometimes man against woman, and just 1v1, and like it's all your fault if you screw it up and nobody else's fault? Is it more the competitiveness or the complexity that you enjoyed solving?
I think more like the competitiveness. I mean, you could argue that 6max or like ring game tournaments even are more complex than heads up, because it's actually a bigger game tree, because there are way more different spots that can occur. But I mean, it's true in the sense that heads up is quite complex, but it's still on a level where you can analyze it yourself. Like for ring game, it's kind of impossible to like truly solve yourself what percent you should open raise. It's more like an experience and stuff like that. But yeah, it was definitely more about the competitiveness that was more direct in or more immediate in heads up than in ring.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. Probably the ranges are just really wide, so it's like sometimes you are with queen high more often out of position, and jack high and 8 high with very crappy hands, which you're probably it's not gonna happen unless blind versus blind in 6max games. But like the pre-flop ranges remain the same, right? You mostly have the same open raising range, very identical 3-betting ranges, but like in 6max you have to have the ability to adapt better to all the different positions, so the pre-flop ranges are changing, but you are going to play more predictable ranges, right? So that makes it a little easier. But I do enjoy the fact that you end up being, and this is something I advise to everyone that is watching. I mean, I'm not saying, hey, go play high stakes heads ups, but we just talked about that before before we started the podcast, that it always really helped me to play some heads up cash game, even though I wasn't beating the games, just for practicing purposes, to sharpening my post flop game. And this has really helped me to play blind versus blind. I have a lot of students who come to me, hey, I don't know how to play blind versus blind, because they feel very uncomfortable playing these wide ranges. And it's also not everyone has a good computer with a good CPU and a good RAM where you can solve like these game trees where ranges are really wide. Sometimes, when you limp, you have like a huge stack to pot ratio with very wide ranges. You can mostly solve it for only one bet sizing, and it takes very, very long time to solve these spots. So I think heads up, if let's say you play $50 tournaments, man, just play NL 5-cent heads up just to get used to playing very wide ranges, and you're probably still going to be able to have a solid win rate if you be able to beat $50 tournaments if you're somewhat smart, as we just talked about it.
I think what's kind of useful is when you play heads up and you play with these wide ranges and you like apply your hand reading throughout the hand, like it gives a lot of practice that is definitely useful for ring game as well, because in ring game then you have way more narrow ranges, or way more how to say it, but like not just narrow, but also like all the hands in a range are kind of similar to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas in heads up they're kind of diverse, and I think it will be much easier for you afterwards to like track ranges in ring games, and so to speak become a better hand reader, or like think more logically or consistently about your and your opponent's range.
Yeah. I always found it extremely challenging at some point if you play one opponent, and as we all are, we think we are better than our opponent, and then at some point when variance strikes and it's not going so well, still to maintain that objectivity, to really not, because it's so easy, oh my god, he has been doing this, and then you come up with fantasy reasons to justify hero calls. How did you manage to control that level of emotions, to not get caught up in that bullshit thinking?
I mean, for me, basically, I was like, most of the time I was kind of applying a GTO near approach, or like an attempt to play close to GTO. So I was basically always considering, okay, so let's say in this spot I want to fold like around 40% or 50% of my range, and then I was thinking, where does my current hand stand in that range? So is it maybe it's a bottom 40% hand, but it has good blockers, so I would rather call, and I could fold like a top 50% hand. I would fold because it has very bad blockers, but I would pretty much never go ahead and fold like a top 30% hand in these spots, or call a hand that is in the bottom 20% or something. I mean, obviously, if you play against recreational players where you think they are way out of line and you can outsmart them, I would sometimes just fold pretty much 0% of my range, or fold like 90% of my range. But I mean, in that context, I think it's kind of okay, because if you're the much better player, most of the time you will be right about your exploit deviations.
Has it happened for you a lot that you had sessions where you had to you came to the point you realized, okay, my mental game is not on point right now because it's not going so well, you had to take a break? Or were you someone who could push through and still have a solid B or C game that it's at least allowed you to still be somewhat profitable in those games?
I would say it depends a lot on my opponent, but especially in the last 1 or 2 years of my career, I've definitely taken more breaks during sessions, just because I felt, okay, it's not going too well, and I felt, okay, probably I would have made this decision otherwise differently if I was still on my A game. And I think then it's always a good decision to either take a break, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes, or even quit for the day and come back the next day. Because I fear when you realize you're on your B game, the chances are kind of high that you're already on your C game, or at least you left your A game a good while ago, so you're probably losing a lot of money relative to what you could do.
Yeah. There was so you were just talking about sessions that didn't go so well. I want to talk about that later because as far as I remember in the forum we were also talking about a match against Very Sweet that didn't go so well. That was quite memorable for you. But before we dive a little deeper into that, you said something that I found very inspiring, and I think it might also be very inspiring for a lot of our viewers, and I hope you don't mind elaborating on that. You said before a podcast that you think that if someone is just really smart, like not smart in the sense of highly intelligent, like a prodigy type of guy, but if you're just very smart, if you're just very rational in heads up and being able to think very logically, you can even outperform someone who might have better fundamentals. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I mean, from my perspective, if you like judge the edge between two players, I think like the main components for me are one, like their fundamentals, how good they understand, or like how close to GTO they are capable of playing. The second one would be I would call it like the general like street smartness or like smartness of their play style.
The Brink Kenny.
Yeah, maybe I don't know much about him, but so I think like in pretty much any game format right now, nobody's playing super close to GTO. I mean, obviously the level has increased a lot in the last years, and yeah, I mean, players at the top are usually like incredibly good, but nobody's playing true GTO in every spot. And in some spots, it will just be about like figuring out what your opponent's doing, what you should be doing, and like how to like exploit your opponent the best way in these spots. And I feel like that this factor is often underestimated by GTO players.
Yeah.
Because you can, like in fundamental ways, you can make a lot of small wins against your opponent, but then if you get into a very rare arcane spot and you figure out, okay, your opponent, like he should be bluffing 10% of the time, but in reality, because the ranges are so difficult to understand, he will be bluffing 40 or 50% of the time, and you just call all your entire like hero core range, you will just crush your opponent. And I think that like someone who's quite smart will just be doing much better at this situation than a weaker player. And the third aspect I would say is like the mindset. But like I never played MTTs, but I had a lot of like I did a lot of staking for a while in these MTTs, and because of the share, and if I had nothing else to do, I would like to rail them, like be it on Twitch or PokerGo or wherever. And I always felt like some players, they were doing like much better in their decisions than they like should do. Like two players coming to my mind are, for example, Fedor Holz and Christoph Vogelsang.
Yeah.
And it felt like they were doing much better in these hero call, hero fold decisions than regulars who like were coming from online cash game, for example. And some people would say, yeah, they have much better fundamentals. They should have a higher win rate or return on these tournaments. But yeah, I think like looking at these decisions made me feel otherwise, made me feel differently.
Yeah, it's way more exploitative. I can definitely confirm that very often. There's so many spots where I'm, back then in poker, when we were taught poker from poker strategy or poker strategy, it was really just, okay, if we don't beat any value hands, we fold. We weren't really thinking about our blockers, or that was not really a thing back then. And that still even applies until today in tournament poker. There are very often spots where there are no natural bluffs possible, and then I just fold my entire range. And sometimes if I value bet everything myself because I know this spot is being underbluffed, I don't check any value hands, and I easily check forward. And I don't know why, and I get this question still a lot when people asking me, Ben, but aren't we getting exploited? Are we not supposed to? I say, no, you need to differentiate between GTO and exploitative poker. And I find it very interesting that someone as you says that even in heads up, it's still quite important to be very smart. It's not all about GTO. It's still about being able to exploit your opponent. Where I would say GTO poker in all of the games, it's probably the most applicable in heads up poker, right? Because you play tons of hands against the same opponent, so you have same spots coming over and over again. It's actually funny. I had a situation because I always say the same spot against the same opponent in tournament poker never ever happens again. Like you have thousands of different players, thousands of different stack sizes, and I don't know, like it never happened. It never happened. And I said exactly the same on Twitch. And I remember I played one day before against one opponent, similar stack size. I think I raised from middle position. Board comes something like ace, deuce, four. I see bet second barrel. And then the day after, I play against the exactly same opponent, exactly the same board, exactly the same stack size. I was like, come on, I quit. But like, I played millions of hands, and it happened once. Once instance where I remember I had exactly the same spot against the same opponent. Even in those 100, 200 runner high stakes tournaments, I cannot imagine playing exactly the same board or somewhat similar board in the same positions in the same spot. And so, and this is one of the requirements for GTO, that you run the spot over and over and over and over again, so that people have the same strategy. But you can do so many different exploits. Your opponent simply won't figure it out, right? So,
I would also say like there are like some spots that are just super rare, especially in the mixed games. I mean, maybe it's not as true for No Limit Hold'em, but some sports are just bound to be like super rare. And in these spots, I think the better, if you're better exploiting your opponent, or like your capability of like understanding or intuitively understanding these spots on the fly, if you're better at that, you will beat your opponent. Whereas in spots that occur quite often, it's more important to be good at the fundamentals. And in ring game, I feel like it's more. I mean, you could be sitting with 4 other strong regulars at the ring game table, and then there's one big recreational player who's losing. And you could be the weakest out of the racks in a fundamental way, but if you're the one who understands the best way how the recreational player plays, and you're also willing to exploit him, like I think it's also some kind of willingness, because like some people, they just cannot leave the GTO play style at all.
Because they would look dumb if it goes wrong, right?
Yeah, right. And some people, they just say, okay, I'm playing sort of GTO or whatever that means against good opponents, but if I'm playing against a recreational player, I'm willing to completely deviate very, very much from my usual play style, and like fold every hand, or like not fold any hand, or bluff every hand I have as a bluff candidate. And then you will have the highest win rate at the table, even if you're the weakest player out of the, or like weakest GTO player.
That's actually an excellent point that you just mentioned. If you think about that, you're one of the weakest of the regulars, but let's say you win 15 big blinds against the recreational, and you might lose 2 big blinds against each of the regulars, or maybe 1 big blind. But like the other regulars are only winning 5 big blinds against recreational, you might actually be the biggest winner on the table, right? Because your exploitative game is much better than the regulars. So that's.
And I think it's like it's not just a theoretical case. I think it's kind of like it probably happens kind of often because
for sure,
usually
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What do you think about Linus Love? Because he has always strived me as someone who, of course, with his heads-up background, strong fundamentals, but I don't know anything too much about his heads-up game, but I had the feeling he's also really good in adapting. and then his ability of understanding poker in general, which is pretty
Yeah.
decent, but then the ability to adapt to MTTs, and I think how quickly he got successful in tournaments was quite impressive. Do you think he's someone that is good in exploiting, or was just his fundamentals so strong, his GTO game so strong that he crushed everyone? Or have you ever played against him as well?
No, I've never played against him. I think he kind of started playing No Limit after I stopped playing No Limit entirely. So
Yeah.
I never played against him, but obviously I've been talking to a lot of people, and they always told me, okay, he's by far the best No Limit heads-up player. And then at some point he started playing PLO, and after like few months, or at least less than a year, people told me he's one of the very best in PLO heads-up, which is very remarkable considering that, I mean, No Limit for sure the most evolved format of poker, but PLO is second, and it's very complex. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't know how he works, but even if you have a really good solution to the game, like, you need to put in so much time and like transition to a different game. Like, that factor makes me feel he's probably also good at adjusting, because I would say if you're not good at adjusting, you would probably also struggle more when learning new games. But I mean, that's just a feeling of me. I've never played against Linus, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I also have to say that if you think about tournament poker in general, and I also want to talk then a little bit more about the mixed games. I really enjoy mixed games, but I'm probably just a big donk. But I enjoy thinking about new formats because it keeps your thought process sharp. Also freshens up poker a little bit, because it can be at some point quite I don't want to say boring, but the same over and over again, right? And the same game, of course, different spots. That if for tournament poker and everyone, if you look at the best players in the world, they are not the best in theoretical gameplay. They're just very, very good at exploiting your opponents, and there might be top 10 regulars right now, according to the Pocket 5 leaderboard, or whatever you want to take as a metric. They are considered as probably the top 10 for winning, but I would clearly say they're probably not even top 50 when it comes to understanding poker. Yeah. But they're just so much better in exploiting the recreationals. I don't want to drop any names because they might feel offended, but I think it's actually, I would see it as a compliment, because that's what matters. We're not making money with understanding GTO. It's not like, oh yeah, he understands GTO the best, so he gets the most money. No, actually, that's not how it works, right? So just wanted to add this as well. Is it something you see similarities in heads up in general, that there's some that aren't?
I mean, I would completely agree to that, and I would also say, like, it doesn't matter at all if you're better at GTO, or if you're like if other players think you're better than at GTO than someone. Like, what matters most at the end of the day is basically how much money you make out of poker, or how much you enjoy it, whatever you want to use. But like, for sure, it doesn't matter who like would do less mistakes or less EV mistakes against GTO than someone else. Like, that's not really relevant. In heads up, I would say it's hard for me to judge, because last couple of years I've kind of exclusively been playing mixed games and draw games, and the field at high stakes online cash games is so small. Like, if you say someone is not in the top 10, he's basically not playing, because there are just less than 10 players at his stake. But it's for sure true that like, the ranking for how well people understand GTO and the ranking of how people are doing, or how good they are probably, is a different ranking. I mean, in some cases, like someone like Sauce, for example, he's super good at the fundamentals. Maybe he's not as good at exploiting, but he's still like okay at it, I would say, and then he's still overall maybe the best or the second best. But yeah, I would say there are big like there can be a big difference between your skill overall and your like GTO skill.
Yeah.
So I would say it's also true for heads up. Yeah.
Yeah. I found it a little bit pathetic, to be honest, sometimes when we have study sessions and I just review some sports with some people. Sometimes, you know, a friend brings in someone new and you review a couple of hands. And I feel like back then it was a lot about, okay, let's try to bring together all our experience, talk about whether he has enough bluffs or how strong that sizing looks like. So it was analyzing. I remember also the sessions I had together when we were studying with Fedor Holz or Rainer Kempe or Steffen Sondheim. It was very effective reviewing. We went through so many hands, everyone sharing input. And these days, it's like, yeah, you know, we should be using a 15% sizing because of XYZ and not 25% sizing. And the EV difference is fucking 0.00 something. And then they talk about that for 30 minutes. I'm like, guys, it's also about using your hourly effectively, right? And it's more like a GTO jerking off rather than just talking about spots effectively. And I feel like it's more about bragging because someone really knows this shit about this spot in theory. And I'm like, sometimes I'm kind of like, okay, that's not really at least for me, not an effective way of studying.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pretty much all about being pragmatic about like how you get the most out of your time. And you could theoretically like solve the board ace, 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 and allow like 10 sizes on each street. And then after like few months, you say, okay, I analyzed this board more than anyone else ever. And I understand it much better. And okay, if you happen to play on this board, congratulations, but like it's super irrelevant for your overall win rate. And I think it's same for analyzing whether you should use like 20% of the pot as a sizing or 25% of the pot. It's no real difference. And if someone else instead used the time to analyze like how his opponents play on the river and how he should exploit it the best way, that person probably got a lot more out of his or her time.
You were just talking about a few opponents. Who do you consider was the most challenging one? Not just because maybe you still have won a lot against this particular opponent, but it was still very challenging. So not taking money as a metric, but for you personally, the way he was playing was very difficult to play.
Yeah, I mean, still, like it's still the same person that I lost most money against. Very sweet.
Okay.
Just because I.
Which games were you playing against him?
So we were mostly playing horse. So basically, limit hold'em, Omaha, high low, and the 3 stud games: Res, stud, and stud 8. And before that, we were playing 8 games. So you had deuce to 7 and PLO and no limit hold'em. But no limit hold'em and PLO are 40 big blinds kept in the past couple of years. I would just say he's the toughest because like he has a like general play style, but still like if he feels I'm like, let's say for example he would like to call a lot in some spot or like tend to be the one hero calling a lot, but if he feels like I'm lacking bluffs in a spot, I kind of had the impression that he was willing to make big hero folds, and the other way around. So if he wanted to fold a lot in a spot, but he figured that I'm probably bluffing too much, he was willing to exploit that kind of hard as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's quite hard to play against someone who's that flexible and thinking things through, while also apparently being fundamentally sound overall. I think that's very challenging to play against that. I mean, obviously it's true about every good poker player in some way, but I think he's just not good. He's very, very good.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we also played a bunch in tournaments, and I always also had a feeling that I didn't really know what this guy is up to, which is always a good sign for a good poker player.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how good he is in no limit ring games. Like, I mean, he probably made a lot of money from PLO and from mixed games. Like sometimes these guys play formats where they have no clue at all and they just don't care about, like, let's say, even if it's a 5K buy-in tournament. But yeah, I would guess that he ranks quite high in this like street smartness, so to speak. And even like, let's say you would invent a new card or board game and you would play it with him, probably if it's remotely close to poker, he will not be terrible at this game right from the beginning.
Do you mind sharing how much you lost against him?
I don't know exactly, but I mean, I think at the tables I lost 3 million.
Oh, that hurts.
And we also cross-booked. Like, I had pretty much no part of the cross-books, but like, let's say the cross-books at least as much as the regular game.
Can you please, for us that everyone is watching that might not know or hears cross-booking for the first time, just quickly explain what cross-booking means?
Okay, so the highest tables allowed on PokerStars are 1,000, 2,000 for the limit games, which is around, I would say, no limit 40K, so $400 big blind. Like, it translates roughly as like that from variance point of view. And if two players just want to play higher than that, what Stars allows, or if they have friends who want to bet on the match, you can agree to crossbook, which basically means if we crossbook 100% of the game, it means if he wins 200K at the table, I owe him additional 200K, which we will just settle, wherever, like in the player transfer function on player-to-player transfer function on Stars, or in crypto, or as a bank wire, like whatever works for both players.
Was it something you considered yourself having an edge, understanding who has an edge on the other player and then taking crossbooks from other players, or was it just more for the sake of gambling?
I mean, no, it was more like I was fine playing 1K, 2K, or in fact, I usually had a bit smaller piece than 1K, 2K, so I already passed a little bit of that game to friends of mine. But then there were other friends of mine who really wanted to have a share of the match. In hindsight, I guess they didn't want to, but back then they did. And yeah, I mean, I talked to Barry, and he had one or two friends as well who wanted to have a piece of that game, so to speak. And then we just agreed to do such a crossbook. I mean, I had no financial incentive to do it. Like, I didn't get a win rate or anything out of it. I mean, that also, like, when people ask, like, what is the biggest game that was ever played in online poker, kind of hard to say, because, like, let's say you play against someone on no limit 5K, and two billionaires decide to bet like 10,000% on that match in secret, and you never know about it. Like, is your game the biggest game that was ever played in online poker? Like, it's kind of debatable because neither you or your opponent had a piece or incentive out of that crossbook the billionaires made.
Makes sense. Who was speaking about a little bit more about No Limit Hold'em, who did you consider as the toughest opponent in that format?
So at the time where I kind of stopped playing No Limit, WCG writer Doug Polk was considered by most to be the best No Limit Hold'em player, and he also played a big challenge back then against Sauce. I don't know, I think they played 30K hands or something, so like kind of meaningful sample, but not a super big sample, and he won. I don't know by how much. I mean, I played some against him, and he was definitely very good. Sauce was very good. I always struggled quite a lot against Will Hasher. I don't know how many people know. Yeah, okay.
I think it's he's spelled Villa Hasha or something, like it depends, but it's like
okay. I mean, I don't know what the name actually means.
I don't know, but for those who are watching, I think you Will Hasha or Villa Hasha, like I think they're both. Like I don't know exactly how he's pronounced, but just for the spelling, because it's not a name, it's not Will Hasha, right?
Yeah,
it's like one word.
Yeah.
So yeah. I haven't seen him being around for quite some time.
I think he quit poker. I mean, I talked to him a little bit after, but like after we stopped playing, sort of. But I've not talked to him in the last couple of years. But from what I know, he quit in the sense that he's still sometimes playing like a tournament online, or he's playing sometimes in Macau, or at least did until COVID. But he's not playing regularly online anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, those were definitely some of the toughest that I played back at the time. I was also playing against Kanu. What is this? Alex Miller. He was also very good, but I didn't play much at all against him. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't mind sharing, who were the ones who you really enjoyed playing against, apart from maybe recreational?
I mean, I definitely enjoyed playing against Isildur.
Okay.
Because like one reason is that was the highest I ever played at no limit against someone. We played at the 400, 800 tables with an additional ante, so it was kind of close to 501k with 100 big blind plus.
So 400 euros or dollars small blind and $800 big blind.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That was the biggest game that existed on full tilt for no limit. I mean, one reason was I definitely felt like I had an edge against him. Another reason was that he played way more like in No Limit Hold'em. He played way more aggressively than it was like considered to be standard back then.
Yeah.
And like the game was way more action packed, so to speak, which like partly contributed to my edge against him probably, but also it made the game more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And we were playing a lot. Like I always kind of enjoyed when you like started a session and you felt like, okay, we are probably going to play like 10 hours or so. Like, and you were not like you were not thinking, okay, we are playing now, but we are probably just playing for like 15 minutes or so. So
yeah,
that was kind of enjoyable. I think the first time I played against Dur was super enjoyable for me because like I guess he will never hear it anyway, so he won't mind. But like, I thought he was terrible when I started playing against him. And when I started playing poker, I was often railing games with him, and like he was considered to be the best no limits online player in the early days of online poker, I would say. And I was kind of shocked when I first played him how bad he actually was. I mean, he probably didn't care because he was making, or supposedly he was making a lot of money in Macau already at the time. So online poker was just a way for him to like donate back. Yeah, right. But like the game was super, super wild against him, and it was kind of enjoyable to play on nosebleeds against someone you grew up with railing at nosebleeds, and it was kind of cool.
What was it that gave you an edge? Was it just waiting and like playing a little bit more tighter and just waiting for good hands, and then they were paying you off and just little bluffing and of course more bluff catching? Or what were the main exploits against them?
I mean, the crazy part was like before I've seen some hands from like high stakes poker, and I always felt, okay, it's probably like staged. He won't be playing like that for real. And then you played against him, and he called a 4-bet with like 10 deuce suited or something, or like I don't know, made a completely like nonsense raise, or like in a 3-bet pot on, let's say, ace 10 deuce board, and you c-bet, and all of a sudden he raises with kings or something when you play for 100 big blinds. And like there were a lot of like weird hands that you would just not see against someone who was decent at 10-20, for example, and we were playing 300, 600 or 200, 400. So it was at super high stakes, but it didn't feel like the game quality didn't feel like 200, 400 or 300, 600 at all.
Yeah. You think maybe a little bit of too much of an overconfidence that they were just going through the stakes and then just some point thought, okay, we're unbeatable?
Yeah, I think like he was a big winner at these 501k games with Guy La Liberté, the owner of the Cirque du Soleil, who was one of the biggest losing players of all time in online poker, I think. And I think he just won a lot, and he kind of felt like, yeah, okay, I can get away with anything. And he probably didn't understand that you can't just like being a big winner in that game doesn't mean you're like the best regular or getting away with such plays against strong regulars.
Yeah.
And from what I heard, like, I think there's an infamous quote of him in 2+2 that he basically at that time didn't accept there's something like GTO. Like someone mentioned the concept to him and he said, yeah, okay, but I can develop a counter strategy against GTO and just exploit GTO. Like he didn't really understand the concept. And I think coming from that background, you think like, yeah, it's okay. I can, if I feel like it's the right moment, I can call a forward with 10 deuce suited, or like in some cases he might even be right if his opponent is bad enough, but in some cases he just made completely nonsense plays. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. You were talking a little bit about you retired, you quit from poker, so you're not playing at all anymore.
Right,
what made you the decision to step away from poker and perhaps jump in new endeavors?
I mean, it was kind of easy for me actually, because I got to the point against Barry Sweet that I didn't want to play him anymore, because like it was getting less and less likely that I was right about me having the edge against him. And if I was not willing to play against Barry Sweet anymore, it was kind of tough at mixed games to get any action, because there's basically just one other guy I could play against, Shao Ren, Mikhail Turitz. But he's kind of busy with live games, with sports betting, and he's not playing that much poker anymore. So like it would be like playing once a week or so, or like I just didn't feel like it's worth it to do that anymore. And pretty much all the other recs that I could play against Sauce, although I have not seen him for a few months already, but I could play against him. He would play me. But Sauce is like one of the players that I feel I could never beat for like a longer time. Like, let's say he would be willing to play a horse against me, which he is not willing to. Probably after a while, he would be better than me. And if we play 8 game from the beginning, he would definitely crush me, because he's much better at no limit, hold limit, PLO, for example. So basically, I didn't have any opponents that I felt like Barry Sweet was the only regular opponent that I could play, and he would play me, but I didn't want to play him anymore. So yeah, the only alternative would have been to learn a new format or start playing MTTs or whatever. I guess I'm just too tired from poker after such a long time to like learn a new game. I didn't feel like it's worth it for me.
What are you spending most of your time now?
I mean, I have a lot of free time now, at least a lot more than I did before. I got a little bit into crypto, like particularly with it's called yield farming, where you like provide your liquidity to exchanges and get rewards for it, which is like a kind of high return rate for you, and it's kind of interesting to analyze it, how you should distribute it between different currencies and different platforms. And I I mean, if you start doing that, obviously you also start reading a little bit about like the general context of cryptocurrencies and
Yeah.
but yeah, otherwise, I mean, I would like to like travel a bit and visit friends. I would also love to do a lot of sports, but all of that is kind of difficult to do right now in the lockdown or general
Yeah.
COVID context.
Do you have any plans for the future? Maybe business plans or any other projects that you would like to tackle after COVID? Is there something that you? Yeah.
No, not
No.
really. I mean, like I'm kind of interested in like general like stock market mechanics, but like it happens that one of my best friends is I think he's very smart and he's running a stock fund, and I've pretty much invested like the majority of my net worth in his fund, and it kind of makes the incentive pretty low, like financially speaking, at least, to engage myself in stock market trading or investments. I talked to Alex O'Moon. He was also a very successful poker player. Alex Luneau, he's called. He played
Yeah.
like there's a documentary about him called
I was just
Nosebleeds.
about to say, yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. He's a French super successful mixed game player, and he started like a sports betting company after his poker career, and like they also they also spend quite a lot of time on like AI.
Okay.
And he's super successful with it, and he says like it's even more enjoyable for him than his poker career. And I think he enjoyed poker a lot, like also like the lifestyle about being a poker player. And I mean, like if it's possible at some point, I might want to see what they are doing exactly and consider doing something like that, or even working at that company. But yeah, I have no real ideas for the next couple of months or so.
Is that something that you can really consider working for someone else now after all the 10 years of freedom, not giving a damn about having any kind of obligations?
I mean, I would say it really depends on the context. Like, if I think about the jobs that my friends outside of poker are doing, I would never consider doing that anymore, because like I really like the idea that you, if you feel like it, you can pretty much do a full week of work, like work 15 hours a day each day. But then if you don't feel like it, you can also take a couple of days off. Nobody cares. It's basically just about you, what you want to do and what you can afford to do. Obviously, if you stop working entirely, you will have less EV in the future.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are a lot of upsides from being a poker player compared to like a regular job that like I would never go back, or like I never was in a regular job, but I cannot imagine doing a regular job.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you're working in a startup, for example, where you don't have like a boss who's like walking behind you and saying like, yeah, you should work more, or and it's more like everyone is contributing something. I mean, yeah, I could definitely imagine that if the context is good.
I think now with COVID happening, companies and especially business owners also realize that it's actually a good thing for workers or employees to work from home and work their own times, because someone is more effective in the morning, someone else might be more effective in the evening. So within Raise Your Edge, and I think we're now around 20 people working for Raise Your Edge. Because I was very, very, very stubborn about that. I think when I was in school, I very early on realized I never really want to be working in a traditional job, because for me it was such a pain to get up in the morning. I was always very productive in the late afternoons, evenings. So that really was very, very suitable for me as a poker player. And I never understood, why would you force someone to work at certain hours? Like, I understand if you work somewhere in the front office and you have to deal with customers and you have certain opening hours, but but most of the jobs aren't like this. So whether you do your paperworks in the morning or in the evenings, and to be honest, most jobs, if you have a 8-hour shift, you're filling in the time with drinking coffees or chatting with coworkers or being on social media, then doing a little bit of work. Most of the work can be done in 1 or 2 hours. And now they're at home, they're like, oh my God, like I could get all my work done in 2 or 3 hours and then have off for the rest of the day. And actually, it really increases the level of happiness, and you can actually get more stuff done in less time because you don't have the distractions. Of course, it has a disadvantage that you're a little bit on yourself, but I think I really, really hope that companies now get to understand that you should give your employees a bit more freedom. I think they would really appreciate that and be way more productive and way more happier overall.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people don't realize what you just said. Like, you can pretty much like spend 8 hours at the office and not do anything basically, because you can just talk to colleagues or make a coffee or like even work, but like not put any brain power into it. And like it can even be like a negative contribution to the company. But if you're like interested in what you're doing, if you're happy about what you're doing, or like the work environment, for example, if you're much happier, for example, working from home or working at the time that you want to work at, you can like the level of efficiency can vary a lot. I think that's definitely true. It's also kind of curious that so many successful poker players that I know have that thing that they prefer working at late hours a lot. What you just mentioned, like I feel like I maybe know 1 or 2 successful poker players who are not like that. Everyone else says like, yeah, I'm much more productive working or playing at nighttime. I never really like, I don't know why it is, but it's definitely very different compared to like the general distribution.
I really hate this advice. Like, you have to get up early in the morning when everyone else is still sleeping. Like, I can also just stay up late. Everyone else is going to bed and I'm still working. You know, it's exactly the same. I think you should figure out for yourself where you're really able to pull off the best work and being very efficient. And when it's for you between 10 and 4 a.m. in the morning, go for it. I mean, of course, there are good books on sleep, and it's probably also, okay, this is a very extreme example, but like especially for a lot of guys from our generation, I think 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. is usually a time where we feel very productive, and you should make use of it, right? And I always have the belief that if you have certain projects, if you have certain tasks, that's the way we're doing. I mean, we kind of have to do it anyway because we have guys from Canada, guys from everywhere, Brazil. So it's like you can't really have similar working hours. So it's just like, okay, we have these tasks, we have these projects, and for me it's like, you know, I don't care when you're doing it. I don't care how much time you do. All we care about is that we get it done in a decent way, and then we see how it went. Like we evaluate, we adjust, and try to do it better next time. But I don't care if someone like, because some like to do like I for me personally, I would prefer working from Monday to Wednesday, 15 hours a day, and have off the rest of the week.
I mean, when I thought about it, like I think there are a few objective reasons why it might be more effective to work at like at later hours of the day. Like, for example, like the doorbell won't ring at nighttime, for example, so there's less distraction that way, or you'll probably also get less phone calls or emails or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, like, I feel like those factors are not nearly as big to like really explain why so many poker players work at nighttime. Obviously, like what you just mentioned, if you have like Canadian or Brazilian customers in a way, or play in games where most of the players are Canadian or Brazilian, obviously that makes a lot of sense. You just have to be awake at these hours if you want to get the most out of it, whether you want it or not. But I feel like most poker players just want to play at night or evening time rather than in the morning, even if the games would run at both times.
Yeah. I also had a lot of friends reporting me that they're not necessarily happy with their jobs, but now once they started working from home, they're enjoying it way more because they do it in 2-3 hours and they don't have a problem, because then you have a much higher reward. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get this shit done now in 2 to 3 hours, and then the rest of the day I can do whatever I want. Like they get certain tasks for the day from their bosses or whatever in their home office, and they have, I don't know, whatever kind of work to do. And then for the rest of the day, they can do the things they enjoy, the activities, or, I mean, not necessarily meeting friends, but like doing their sports activities, or maybe working on a side job, or spending more time on poker. And it's much easier for them to do the work than at work. I mean, kind of understandable, because like you have to be there for 8 hours. And I think subconsciously we understand that, okay, this shit, I could get it done in 2 or 3 hours, but now I have to be here for 8 hours. And it can be quite frustrating, right? We are all wired in a way, we want to get shit done, especially as, don't want to be somewhat discriminating, but I think especially we as a man, we enjoy problem solving. We want to do it quick, we want to do it fast. I also know it from my relationships. Sometimes my girlfriend is like, oh, you always want to solve problems. Like, I just want, you to listen to me. And this is understandable. Like, we're simply different. And I think especially for a man, we want to get the shit done. We don't want to do it quick in an efficient way. And then when you have to be there at work for 8 hours, I think it can be quite frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, like I've heard some people say that they prefer working in the office, but it's usually for reasons like they have children at home and it's hard for them to take care of their work while they are at home, or in some cases that basically going to the office still gives some like some social life, so to speak, whereas if you're just at home during a lockdown and you don't get to meet anyone, it's worse for them. But I think from like an efficiency point of view, I mean, there are so many good reasons why it's better to work from home that you just mentioned. Like for me, when I started playing poker, it felt super good, like being able to work from home, and like that flexibility. Like, I mean, I don't know how possible it is in a regular job that you do from home, but like, let's say you want to meet someone, but it's only possible between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., then you can just do that and work at other times, work before or work afterwards. Whereas if you have a regular job and you have to come to the office, it's just not possible. You're just way less flexible. I also feel like for me, at some points, I just didn't feel like studying poker for 1 or 2 weeks, and then I just wouldn't do it. But in the next couple of weeks, I would spend, I don't know, 10, 15 hours a day on it. In a regular job, you would just be forced to work 8 hours each day, no matter if you feel like it, and that definitely has a negative impact on your level of efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. Something I also wanted to talk about that you mentioned earlier. Have you been involved in stakings heavily? Did you do a lot of stakings?
Yeah. I mean, I started like tournament staking. I started when I think the second one drop happened. I think that was 2014. Ever since then, okay, so like the start of that was kind of funny. Like at some point in 2014, I didn't have that much no limit hold'em action anymore, and I didn't feel like playing that much. And at some point, I thought, okay, so how can I increase my EV from poker? And what I did was basically I went through all the games. Like I selected all the games in the lobby, even like Omaha, Courchevel or something like that. And I was looking at the guys who were sitting at the few highest stakes, and I tried to contact each and every one of them, like No Limit, PLO, Deuce to 7 triple draw, and so on. And for example, in Deuce to 7 at that time, Gus Hansen was playing 2K, 4K, and I figured it was probably a very good game. And I wondered, like, if someone is sitting at a little bit lower stakes, probably it would be a good spot for him as well to play in these 2K, 4K games.
Why didn't
and
you
they
play
might
yourself?
be really. I mean, I started playing myself in these games, but it was at the time when I was still playing No Limit Hold'em exclusively.
Okay, understand.
And so yeah, for example, like that's the way I got in contact with
It's very
Alex on
smart.
Moon. Yeah, I mean, like at that time it felt kind of good. Like I got in contact with Alex on Moon, who was sitting at 200, 400, 300, 600, but he was not playing in the 2K, 4K games with Gus Hansen. And he was willing to sell me, like, I don't know, 70% of his action to play in these games. And I would send him some money beforehand. And I would also pay him small win rate on his on his hands against Gus Hansen. And that was super profitable, obviously.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing in PLO, for example, with Kamicon. Like when he retired 2 years ago, he posted like his graph, and he won with, I think, 30 big blinds per 100 lifetime in PLO heads up. And I mean, he was super risk averse. He was selling me a good chunk of his action even at 5,100 or 2,550, and it was just basically money printing. Like my idea was sort of when I'm asleep, I would like to have like a copy of myself playing, or even like ideally like 2 copies of mine. And yeah, I mean that's basically the way it started for me. And then I also got involved in live tournament staking. My roommate was doing a lot of such staking, and I could buy pieces through him. And in some cases, I contacted players myself and bought pieces. So yeah, I think from when I started 2014 till basically last year, or like end of 2019, I was buying a lot of pieces. In 2020, it just didn't happen as much because there were no real live tournaments because of COVID, and also the guys I had pieces of in online cash games mostly quit before 2020. Yeah.
I know this is something most people feel very uncomfortable talking about. Still gonna ask, did you ever get scammed?
No, not with. I mean, with staking, I never got scammed in any way, and I feel like people are way. Well, that is probably a bad advice, but I would say people are too scared of scams in staking, because I feel like if you start talking to someone who has a good reputation in the poker scene, and he's not scammed anyone for like last 5-10 years, I would say the risk of being scammed by that person is very, very small. Like in some cases, people were owing me like 7-digit numbers, and I was not concerned at all, and I never had any issues with them. But I mean, I did get scammed a couple of times outside of staking. That was mostly about like cross booking, for example. I mean, the issue with cross booking is that sometimes people play for way higher stakes than they can actually afford. And after they lose, they tell you, I mean, I can pay you a little bit, but I can't pay you all of it at all, and I'm going to owe you that money. So like it was basically a negative free roll, because I would have paid if I had lost, but I didn't get all of it, or even not even part of it in some cases. And in some cases, in that context, I was also lending money to people I cross-book with. And I got scammed in these ways, but with staking, like at like very high volume of staking, I would say, I never got any scammed at all in any way. And I would say what's even more important, I rarely ever had like a dispute with a player about like what win rate should we agree on or what cut should we agree on. Like it was usually a very good experience for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't been heavily involved in staking myself. Like I barely stake players. It's just not, I don't have the time because you want to do some diligent research to get some info about the players, right? And then the accounting. So there's a little bit of effort before and after the staking. Not just a little bit. It can be, especially if you do a more higher volume, you have to be careful because sometimes numbers can get lost or confused, and then it can be a little bit of a mess, and it can be quite annoying. So I was only with players I really trust and I know, and I know they're beating the games. I also definitely did some terrible buys sometimes where I got hyped by the staking trend. I remember a couple of years ago, staking was quite popular. You had a lot of stables coming out. I think in these days it's not so big as it used to be anymore. I feel the market is way more saturated than it used to be. But yeah, I definitely did some. Not that many, but there were one or two where I actually knew, okay, Ben, that's not a good buy. It was more for the sweat. I was a bit too delusional about it. But yeah, in general.
I mean, it's definitely true that like there is a lot of effort involved that is probably like hidden at the beginning, like the accounting basically, and agreeing on markup or win rates or whatever. So I think a lot of poker players kind of hate doing any sort of accounting because it feels to them like a regular job, sort of.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely necessary to do. And you, like poker players, a lot of poker players have the tendency to say, okay, we will do accounting at some point, and some point means it will be a year later. And at that point, nobody really remembers what happened. Like did the player receive any money from you at the venue or not? And I think if it comes to that, it's really painful to do the accounting. So I think you have to keep track of what is happening and try to make the accounting in time before it gets out of hand.
Yeah, I once had a bad experience in a live tournament where we were even with, like, it was not my best buddy, but like it was someone I knew very well, and this kind of marked me where we were buying from someone action and we were sharing the action amongst each other. So I was selling and I was buying and I was essentially reselling the action. So we were sharing the percentage and we were writing it down, or we were writing down on my phone. And we were friends. We were all three in the same room. I was like, okay, I'm selling. I have, I don't know, 70% of the action, the other guy 20%, the other guy 10%. And I was like, we were writing it down on my phone. I was like, yeah, everyone agrees on it. We were all three. I also thought, okay, there's someone else. And then the guy didn't cash, or I don't know. And so we owed him money. And then I was like, okay, I get 20% from you, I get 10% from you. And I was like, no, I didn't have 20%. I also had 10%. I was like, no, we were writing it down. Like, but yeah, it was live. We didn't send messages and we were good buddies. So I thought, okay, like, and even the other guy could confirm, yeah, he had 20%. He said, no, I said like 10%. So that was kind of an experience that, okay, it was dumb. You know, you make it once and then ever since you always write a message in Skype or Discord or wherever, or WhatsApp, and then you get a confirmation. But yeah, you should definitely, that's why I also stay a little bit away from doing staking with good friends. I want to have a little bit of a distance, still being able to trust them and knowing they're profitable, but like, or I'm overly cautious when I'm doing it with friends. Better confirm it twice and be overly cautious just to make sure, because when money gets involved, sometimes it can be this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a kind of like, when you just told that story about like the swapping or selling pieces, I remembered when I first started selling pieces to friends, it got kind of out of hand, and I realized, okay, I should make it simple or not sell at all in the future. When I started playing against Dur, I had the funny idea of selling different pieces depending on what stack size we were playing. So let's say we were playing 70 big blinds or less, I would not sell any action. If it was 70 to 100 big blinds deep, I would sell 20%, and so on, all the way to like, I don't know, 300 big blinds or so. And then it became clear that in Hold'em Manager 1, which was like the only tracking program all of us used at that time, it was not really possible to filter for effective stack size.
Okay.
So we figured out some way to do it, but you kind of had to do it like manually, and it was a complete mess. And I was thinking like, I would rather have the session had never happened, and I would not have won any money rather than this mess and having to figure out who won which amount. I think it's the exact same way you said it. Like you do it once, and then you realize, okay, just never again, and then you figure out like an easier way to do it, or stop doing it entirely.
Yeah, for sure. That can be quite painful. When you something that is also very interesting for me, and I think also for a lot of our viewers, how was your study routine usually looking like? Were you someone who you were working a lot with solvers, or were you just writing a lot of notes and just adjusting your game based on your opponents, reviewing database reviews, maybe watching poker videos? I don't know.
So kind of funnily, it was very different in No Limit than it was in the mixed games the last couple of years, because in No Limit, I mean, at the time where I was really good at No Limit, solvers basically didn't exist. So I was making a lot of notes about my opponents and working on them, or like working on the game plan against certain opponents afterwards. But I was also obviously like reviewing hands or talking general strategy with friends of mine. And only in the last year that I played No Limit Hold'em, like I got a solver for No Limit Hold'em in 2013, which was probably like one of the first solvers for No Limit Hold'em, I would guess, because it was far before Pio solver came out. But it was also like a lot worse than Pio solver. Not like the solutions were not much worse, but it took a much longer time to solve a spot. You had more restrictions to the bet sizes you could allow. It was more difficult to set up the game tree. It was more difficult to it was not as good of a visualization when like reading the strategy. So I was not working much with solvers at all at that time. And then when I started getting into mixed games, like for most of the games, no solver existed at all. So that was probably like the best experience of my poker career, because it felt like playing or learning new board games, but playing for really big amounts of money. That was a kind of cool experience.
How did you learn the mixed games then? Did you have a coach, or are you just learning all by yourself?
I mean, I did have a coach. I was like, I was coached by Alex on Moon, who I was staking at the same time, which was sort of funny. But I mean, we didn't do like intense coaching. It was more like I was playing a lot and I was asking him questions, but these questions were super basic. Like in No Limit Hold'em, I was back at the time, I was at a very high level compared to now. Like it would rate kind of low, I would say, just because the game evolved so much. But when I started playing mixed games, I was basically asking questions like on the level of like, should I open raise ace 10 suited on the button? Like there were some really like trivial or like beginner questions. And then I was also playing against Alex on Moon, and I would send him the video afterwards, and he would just review how I was playing. And I mean, at some points I got solvers for one game, solver for another game out of these mixed games. And my work routine kind of changed quite a lot from then, because then it was more like I was playing a lot against solutions. like it was always super important for me to have a tool that made it possible playing against a solution and not just viewing the strategy. And so it was like playing against solution, and if I made a mistake or got into a spot where I didn't understand why the solver was doing what he was doing, I was opening the strategy and basically looking at it until I felt like I understood the spot, and then try to like cross apply it to a different spot. Like let's say I got something interesting out of like, I don't know, ace 10 deuce 4 board, and then I would see how it is on a different board if my prediction is right, that about which sizing is used or whatever. Yeah, and I was just doing that over and over again for all the mixed games, I would say, playing and reviewing, but also obviously still looking at tendency of my opponents, because as we discussed earlier, you can't just focus on your GTO game. You would just leave out crucial information because your opponents won't be playing GTO, especially at the mixed games, because in mixed games you have like 5 or 8 games to be good at, and it will always be just like more, you have to be an all-rounder between the games, and you won't be super good at all of the games.
What was the game you were the best at, or that you enjoyed the most playing?
I mean, I think my best game was Deuce to 7 triple draw.
I actually really like it. It's a fun game.
Yeah, and Badugi, which is also a draw game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pronounced Badugi. I don't know. So both are draw games, limit draw games. I don't know which one I enjoyed the most. I mean, limit hold'em is quite cool.
Really?
Yeah.
I hate it. I hate limit hold'em. You can never bluff.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like what you described earlier, like coming from ring game to heads up and playing with wide ranges. If you go from no limit heads up to limit hold'em, that's just the next step. Like super wide ranges throughout all the hand, basically. And I find limit hold'em super cool because it's like you just have to think logically about the hand. I would bet that every strong no limit hold'em player, if he spends some time on limit hold'em, he would become very good at that game, or like at least mediocre at that game.
Yeah.
I don't know which game. Like I think depending on my mood, or like it changed a lot which game I was enjoying the most. But probably overall it was Badugi, just because like I was one of, or like maybe like the only person at the time who had a solution to that game, and it felt a little bit like playing against like coming from the future and playing against like you were doing stuff that your opponents didn't understand at all. That felt kind of good, and I had a super high win rate. But on the other hand, Badugi was never played on nosebleeds, and it was you were never playing against super competitive opponents. So yeah. Each game had its pros and cons, I would say.
What do you think makes the difference between guys who are able to consistently win until today and guys who gave up on poker?
I mean, it also depends like why you gave up on poker, obviously. Like some people like...
Based from your experience, like what do you think like were the most common reasons, or something that it's like a pattern that you think a lot of players struggle the most with when they give up, or before they give up?
I mean, if you were successful in 2009 or 2010, the poker environment was just way different very different from nowadays. You were not as forced to study hard as you're now, basically. You were completely fine just playing against very weak opponents back then, and that's something you basically just can't do anymore. You just have to play against good opponents in some ways. And I think some people just can't deal with the variance. Some people just like they are good at exploiting very weak opponents, but they just I don't know, they're not smart enough or not competitive enough to deal with opponents on their own level.
Yeah.
And also I feel like the kind of work, like for some people looking at a solver or looking at like a matrix of hands is very painful. And for some people it's super enjoyable and it's basically what they like to do. I feel like it changed a little bit towards where more analytical players, like nowadays the proportion of analytical players is much higher than back then, because back then it was not as important of a skill to be analytical.
That makes sense. That's true. A good point. Yeah, actually, I can imagine that a lot of players are not really enjoying, looking at those solver, the results. It looks kind of dry. It looks, it's not fun. It's not sexy. It's not that what you imagine the lifestyle of a poker player. But actually, it's very identical to a stock trader, right? You're looking at charts. You're looking at results, frequencies. It's actually a lot of the times just very dry work.
Yeah, I think like Isildur kind of represents that pretty well, because he was really good at No Limit Hold'em at some point. But basically from the point onwards where solvers came out, he moved down, and like now he would probably be like a straight up fish in like competitive No Limit high stakes.
Okay.
I mean, just because he would never be able to, or like he would not enjoy at all studying in a solver. And I mean, in the early days of solutions, it was still like people didn't know how to use them very well, how to get much out of it. I mean, as you mentioned, even nowadays, some people focus on whether they should bet 15% or 20% of the pot. But people get more and more out of solvers, generally speaking. And if you don't spend any time with solvers and you don't have friends who tell you what is important, like from the solutions, you just fall back.
I think there's a balance between being able to enjoy the solution. I could also dig into solutions and nitpick on everything and just not learning very efficiently and just grinding through the solves. But at some point I also need to, or everyone needs to, if you want to take poker serious, you need to find the threshold where you say, okay, that's where I'll be looking into solvers and different sizings, but at some point I need to say stop. Okay, need to prioritize what spots am I studying, what are the most repetitive spots, what are the spots I struggle the most, or what are the spots my opponents struggle a lot. Like, especially in tournaments, for example, it's a lot like blind versus blind and multi-way. Multi-way is really difficult to study. Most players don't have the hardware that would support these large solves. Or you would need to rent a server. It comes with additional cost. It's a lot of time to set that up. So it's not really studied. And just by studying it a little bit, but just seeing a few patterns, what you're supposed to, and you realize, oh my God, this is what I'm supposed to do. For example, a multi-way spots, like the in-position player, the third player that is on the button, kind of like he's supposed to do a lot of stabbing, like with the small sizing, because a lot of the sandwich players struggles a lot with heads. He could easily continue heads up, but you just fold out so much equity with small sizings. Sometimes even frequencies up to 60-70%. That's where it is. Just by looking into that, it's like, okay, players aren't stabbing pocket deuces on, like ace 8-7 with a backdoor flush draw 3-way, because it's just such an unnatural stab. And once you start realizing, it's so much easier for you to check way more of the out of position play, because you realize, oh my God, I'm going to have such a higher equity realization because the in position player has never looked into these solves. And just grinding through these spots that are really understudied, so to say. I don't even know if that is a proper term in English. And then just, going through the spots. Okay, what are the spots that are understudied that population is not understanding? Instead of grinding through 200 hours of properly c-betting in position, because at some point the learning curve gets lower. Right?
Yeah.
And this is where I think you need to find the balance between, still studying and doing the dry work, but still like just trying to get the most out of each of the spots, and then still talking to friends. Like at some point saying, stop, okay, I studied that far with solvers, and then still reviewing with friends, getting input, being efficient. And but yeah, as you said, if you don't enjoy the solver work, I think what people might misunderstand is we're not saying you should be working with solvers. Like, you should be very efficient and very effective.
Yeah. And I mean, like, what you described just now, for example, like betting at a high frequency with a small sizing to fold out equity, for example, like stuff like that. If I think about how the best players were playing in 2012 at No Limits Hold'em, like it was kind of common. You would have like one sizing each street. So for example, you would always, regardless of the board, bet half the pot on flop, 2/3 or 3/4 on the turn, and then on the river, I don't know, 3/4 or pot. You would basically never overbet. You would never have multiple sizings. You would never bet very small. You would never bet against initiative. And like, I feel like it's really cool that by looking at the solutions, people figured out all kind of plays that were against like the conventions of poker back then. And I mean, if you would show a solution to someone back then where like you're supposed to bet very often with like 20% of the pot sizing, they would just have no idea how to implement it or how to transfer that knowledge to other spots. Like for you now, like it's standard to understand, okay, you fold out a lot of equity efficiently that way. And if you would bet bigger, you would kind of isolate yourself too much against like the strong hands. And like, I think it's really cool, like how much poker evolved because of solvers. But if you just have a solution and you just like learn it and don't try to transfer it and understand why the solver does these plays, you don't get really much out of the solver.
Yeah.
So like a lot of my friends, they, or when I read on forums, they say, yeah, okay, if you have a solution, then basically you have everything you need, but it's just a different kind of work. You still mostly need your own brain to understand why these plays are happening and how to transfer them.
Yeah.
I would say you can't point out enough what we talked earlier about that like you shouldn't study to just feel good about yourself having studied a certain volume. You should just always try to be like self-critical where you feel like you're losing money when playing, or at least not winning as much as you could be or should be, and where your weaknesses are, and just work on them kind of relentlessly. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you spend 1 hour a day or 10 hours a day. You should just try to okay, I mean, if you're mostly concerned by your EV in poker, obviously it matters if you spend 10 or 1 hour a day, but you should just try, no matter how much time you spend, you should try to get the most out of it. And the most out of it certainly doesn't mean that you should try to understand whether you should bet 15 or 20% of the pots. If that is your main concern, it means you're the best poker player in the world, because if you have no other weaknesses, then
that was an excellent way of describing it. It sounds so simple, and sometimes it's so difficult to describe such complex things or problems that people have with such easy words. Maybe you should consider opening a poker school. But that's exactly the way I think as well. People just study for the sake of feeling good. Sometimes like I studied, so now it's not my fault. Like, I studied enough. So if I perform bad or I run bad, it's the variance. Like, I study 5 hours a day, and it's such a overused saying. But like, it's not all about working hard. It's about working smart. And there are for sure so many grinders out there that study way more than I do. But like, I can look at one spot for 10 minutes and probably get more out of it, and being able to apply in my game that others that would study for 2 hours, 5 different spots. I always say every 3 months or 6 months, I sit down and reflect, what have I learned in poker over the last 6 months? And I want to be able to fire 10 things in like a couple of minutes, or at least 5 things. And if you think about, like, so many players have studied probably hundreds of hours, and then they're like, okay, what did I learn? And if it already starts like this, man, you studied so much, like, you should be able to rapidly fire so many different things. Yeah, I learned this in multi-way spots. I learned this ICM spot. I learned this for double barreling, about hero folding. You know, it's like, if you really struggle, like, also being able to explain it in a way that others would understand it. I think this is, for me, a level of, okay, you really get the shit. You really understand what you have to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, like when I started playing heads up, when I was still not too much into it, I was watching videos on Blue Fire Poker, which was a training site back then. I don't think it exists anymore, but and very often during the video, I would move the mouse cursor into the video to check where I am in the video line, like how much more time I have to endure till the video is finished and I can do what I really enjoy, like playing poker or doing whatever. And I think whenever that happens, you won't get anything out of it, basically, because if you don't enjoy like the learning experience, you won't really enjoy anything. It's like, I mean, if you think back about school or like university, you learn it, you like put it into the exam, but afterwards, like 2 weeks later, you don't remember anything. And like if you study something in a solution that you really like find interesting and enjoy, you could ask that person probably like a year later or so, and he would still like, maybe he would even be able to mention like what exact hands he was looking at specifically. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good idea to write down what you learned in the last couple of weeks. What I was doing in the last couple of years, for each game, I had a Google document. And in that Google document, I had different like headlines, like different chapters, so to speak. For example, the chapter general concepts. And each time I was learning a new concept, I was writing it down there, and I was trying to elaborate on it. So like giving a hand example, or like could be, for example, about like small sizing for equity denial, or in which spot you should be overbetting or why, or whatever. And then like add all kind of chapters, like for flop, c betting, what, like how to design your check raise strategy on the turn, and so on and so on. It's like massive documents. Like I think my Omaha high low document, for example, is like 300 to 400 pages. And I mean, I would sometimes just copy in a hand example that I studied in a solution, and I would write down all the stuff that I learned in the studying the solution. I mean, my idea was usually that I would at some point read through the document, and in some cases I've done that, and it's, I think, super efficient. But in most cases I've actually not done it. But I think just writing it down has a huge benefit of memorizing it or understanding it better. And I think you should really try to avoid what you just mentioned, that you study and then at the end of the month you think, okay, what did I learn this month? And if you can't come up with any answer, probably you just didn't learn anything.
Or you really, like, imagine now when you have the time, the capacity, and you don't have the pressure of playing poker, and you think about what you have learned, and it takes you some time to come up with something. Now imagine you're at the tables, you're under pressure, you have very little time. You really think you're able to apply it? Right? Speaking about the ability, like, it's essentially like driving a car or brushing our teeth. Like, it happens. Like, we don't need to think about it. Right? That's the level of knowledge, the subconscious knowledge you want to accomplish in your studying there. You just know it. right? You don't need to think about it.
Yeah, I feel that's completely true. Like you should basically differentiate between like your A game and your like knowledge game. Your like knowledge game when you study in a solution or talk with friends is completely different from what you're capable of implementing in your game. Like it's not completely different, but if you struggle explaining or understanding something outside of the tables, you will never be able to apply it to a real game.
Yeah.
Because in a real game, it's not like you're asked the questions. So please, can you explain when to use a small sizing? It's more like you are in a sport where you should use a small sizing, but you just don't realize it. For sure.
I think for sizing actually, I know it's important for flop and turn, but I think the most important is on the river. Really understanding, especially with your value hands, to extract the most out of your value hands. I mean, if you look at the EV with all of your value hands, like you make 200 big blinds, 300 big blinds. With your bluff, it's very often just like 3 big blinds, 2 big blinds, 0.5 big blinds, bluff catches. That's, again, I'm not saying never study it, but like sometimes people study all these bluff catching and bluffing spots, but then totally fuck it up with your value hands, like bet way too small, don't understand when to overbet for value, or understanding where people have a hard time folding their, very often, your opponent's never going to fold. Like the way the hand went, he has a very strong hand, we have an absolute monster, and like then people bet half pot or one quarter pot or 1/3 pot. And this is where I really put my main focus on. Like let's say if I like 70% of my bet size studying goes onto the river, like 20% turn and 10% flop. Because very often if you look at the EV difference of betting 1/4, 1/3 or half pot on the flop, and like it's literally a penny.
Yeah, I mean that's the funny thing, because I was just laughing when you said like you're spending over 70% of your time on rivers, because for most people it's the opposite. And I think it's just because like it's more like it's easier to analyze on the flop or even pre-flop, because like there are so many different river or like board combinations to the river and so many different spots that people like, it's basically what we discussed before. They just want to spend, let's say, 10 hours for a certain amount of days. And they say, okay, I'm going to analyze all kind of flops and look at the sizing. And you can even make these reports in PyroSolver, for example, where you see how often are these sizings used on different boards, board like classes or whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I mean, the money is basically on the river. And just because it's harder to analyze doesn't mean you shouldn't analyze it. Like it rather means you should spend most of your time on the river. But I mean, that also makes like for a very good poker player, like if someone has no clue at all how to analyze things on the river, he won't get anything out of it. So he's probably he's probably best off spending his time on the flop, but that just means he won't have any big progress in poker. Or like probably it indicates that you should look for coaching, or I don't know, to like get enabled to analyze rivers efficiently. But if you're spending most of your time on pre-flop or flop, no matter what situation you're in, you shouldn't be happy about it, because it's not a good sign. Either you're spending your time inefficiently, or you're just not good enough to spend time efficiently.
I have to throw in though, when you start playing poker, and this is something I'm always trying to teach people, is the main focus should be on solid preflop fundamentals, because now people might confuse like, oh, okay, now fuck the preflop fundamentals. Well, if you get to the river with 7-3 off all the time, like then you're gonna be in a big problem. But like once you reach a certain level where, let's say, you're already an established player, maybe you're winning on low stakes or mid stakes, and you struggle moving up, I'm talking about that player pool. Maybe because you're not paying too much attention to rivers, or you have wrong studying routines. And that's where once you have like the basic game plan of knowing the preflop fundamentals, of course not perfect, and knowing when to c-bet, then I would heavily focus more on turn and rivers. For someone who's new to the game, or maybe is not a winning player yet, it's very often because they play stupid hands pre-flop, they're not patient enough, they have mindset problems. Like the most common problems for beginners that won't allow them to even win on low stakes. Like usually low stakes just, man, like it's still like 2009 to be honest on micro and low stakes. I mean, I still play $11 tournaments. I play the Sunday Storm. I record low stakes cash games or low stakes tournaments for YouTube or for the course. So, and I know what's going on. I still have sometimes students where we reviews hands from low stakes. Like just be fucking patient, play strong hands, bet big when you have it, don't tilt, and you got to be winning on low stakes.
Yeah. I mean, if you're at that level, you should just not use any time on solvers anyways, because I think at that point it's more about like learning like the raw fundamentals of poker, playing some, getting used to the swings, and getting like into a poker player mindset, so to speak, like thinking in ranges, not thinking about like getting rid, at least to some degree, of the result bias. But
long-term thinking, proper bankroll management,
Right, But I think once you're getting to the level where you should be using solvers, or I think even like at that level, when you just reached it, you should not spend too much time on flops, basically, and you should try to spend time on like rivers, because at rivers most of the money is made, to be honest.
Yeah, very good. Last question, and then you're free for the weekend. You said you retired. Is it for you an ultimate decision, or can you imagine to come back at some point? What has to be given for you to come back?
I mean, I kind of quit because I was lacking games, not because I didn't enjoy it anymore at all. So, like, let's say, I don't know, some opponent would come back who was giving regular action at like higher stakes or at an interesting game regularly. I wouldn't mind playing that game again.
Okay.
But judging from the last couple of years in online poker, that hasn't happened in the mixed games. So I would say 95% chance that I'm done for good. I mean, probably I will still like some people that I was playing against on Euro sites at high stakes in 2012 or so. Sometimes I see them playing a Scoop or W Coup tournament, and I always found it kind of funny. But now, like, I can imagine being that person, like just playing no limit hold'em tournaments in Scoop or W Coup or something, or even playing a live event if I want to go to the location.
So that was my next question. Could you also see yourself playing more live tournaments if it's back to normal, if COVID is over, or would allow us to play live tournaments again?
I mean, I would not consider playing like the high roller tournaments, just because I'm not good at tournament poker, and I mean, like I don't want to spend a lot of time to get good at these tournaments. I mean, maybe I could get good, I don't know. But like, let's say there's an EPT tournament somewhere, and I feel like, okay, going to that city would be fun anyways.
Combining it with travel.
Yeah, there's no reason for me not to do it. But yeah, I would not like become a professional tournament player and go from event to event and do that regularly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see. I think we would love to see you back in the grind, railing some epic high stakes hands. So be sure you're gonna have a big crowd rooting for you. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure listening. I think this is something that is not being shared a lot from these epic heads-up games. And also thank you for sharing your wisdom when it comes to studying. I think a lot of our viewers are going to be very grateful for that, and it really is going to help them to improve their game. And so thank you so much for taking the time.
As well, for having me.
Maybe we're going to have another episode soon. You never know. And I wish you all the best. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys next time. There was another episode today with Raul Gonzalez.